All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to America Now. I'm Barb Adams. Thanks so much for joining me. I've got a great show lined up for you tonight, so I hope you stay around for all 3 hours. But if you do miss any part, you can listen to this or any of my shows in their entirety on my website, radioamericanow.com, under archives. Well, I think most of us would agree with Lord Acton that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You know, throughout history, humanity has suffered far too many examples of the abuses of power. In our own republic, separation of powers and the free press evolved to reduce the likelihood of leaders becoming power addicts. Unfortunately, as the philosopher Bertrand Russell pointed out, power is sweet. It is a drug, the desire for which increases with habit. Today we seem to be living in a society addicted to power and money, from the top down in almost every facet. The average person struggles and suffers while those with the power live in privilege. Is this addiction to power increasing, and are we in need of some sort of intervention? Joining me now, as always, this first hour is author and former statewide prosecutor and Deputy Attorney General of New Jersey, John J. Higgins. Together we form the Nonpartisan Practical Solutions for America. We ask you to join us here on air and on our new Facebook page to work together to find common ground in discussing and solving the challenges in present-day America. If you'd like to join tonight's discussion, please give us a call, 800-259-5791. Again, that's 800-259-5791. I know we had a bit of a glitch last week. A couple people did write me about the phone. So if we have any problems, you can always write me at barbadams@radioamericanow.com. Again, the number 800-259-5791. Hey, John, welcome back. How are you doing?
Good, Barb, and how are you?
I'm doing well. Finally got a little snow here in Colorado. It's been gorgeous otherwise, 60s and 70s. No complaints.
Well, I have extra out here on the East Coast. We can always ship it out to you if you want. No, I'm quite happy being out here where I am with the weather I normally have. So John, there's so much to talk about when we're talking about addiction to power in the U.S. You know, where do we even begin? Where do you want to begin? Well, I think we should start at the time of the Founding Fathers, because that really seems to be the time that there was an intervention back in those days in trying to straighten out the inequality that had happened among the classes. If people remember correctly, we were like an offshoot from England that had a royal class and basically owned everything, because the sovereign really owns everything, and would bestow it upon earls and dukes and knights and that sort of thing. And that really didn't transfer across the ocean to this side. So most of the people here were really dependent upon the good graces of whatever king or royalty were in place. And that's not only the English side. The Dutch had that going on here. France had it going on. Spain as well had it going on. And I think that was the main offense that really got the Founding Fathers agitated, and they came up with a solution, although it took a revolution to get there, about trying to equalize the power base among people. That, you know, the statement that all men are created equal, that there's not a class that's above another.
Right. We seem to be forgetting that in this country right now. And I know when you're talking about the Founding Fathers, John, you know, they had their opinions about corporations, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. They did. Well, first of all, corporations didn't exist like they do today. This is like an anomaly in history. I don't know of any other society where there was any kind of corporations that exist today, because of, you know, political lines were always much firmer. So you wouldn't have multinational kind of corporations. They would have a loyalty to their sovereign in whatever country they were. We're not in that place anymore. The corporations have, in many ways, become nations unto themselves.
Yeah, with larger budgets than a lot of small nations in the world, you know. And today's corporations, as you're mentioning, many of them being multinational, are really out to promote their agendas. period. You know, they pay the employees far too little money. Employees these days can't even afford decent health care. They can't save for retirement or unemployment. And heaven knows, you know, that was something that was once provided to employees. And these days it sounds like even mentioning something like that, this is a travesty that the corporations just kind of look at it and go, you know, this is ridiculous. And the politicians, you know, at best, most of them are supporting the corporations because the corporations are supporting them.
Oh, absolutely. The problem today is if you want to get elected, right now we're going into a presidential cycle, which, you know, has become so stretched out. It's nothing like it was 20 years, 30 years ago, that right now it's the race for the money. It's got nothing to do with the votes. It's the race for who gets the biggest war chest. I mean, the Founding Fathers would be rolling over in their graves with the whole idea that it took money to get elected.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you were talking, let's go back a little bit. I want to kind of retrace when we go back to the Founding Fathers. And again, talking about corporations, there was a corporate monopoly actually existing back then that kind of helped lead to our revolution, the East India Tea Company.
Yes, and they basically were owned by Parliament. They had shareholders that all the members of Parliament were on, so no wonder they were designated as a monopoly for, I guess, Massachusetts and pretty much any of the other colonies, that if you wanted tea, you had to buy it from them. And then, of course, the Crown, because I believe it was the French and Indian War, they wanted the colonists to have to pay for that. They, you know, imposed all these tariffs and whatever. But you couldn't buy tea unless you bought it from the East India Tea Company. And contrary to, you know, what the Tea Party people in our country are being, you know, propagandized with, was that, you know, corporations were not their friends. Corporations were very limited. They were chartered by the king and for a specific purpose, like exploring. Henry Hudson would have been chartered to come across the ocean and explore the New York area, or whatever part the early navigators were coming across the ocean for. And then they would split up the profits. And then that would be the end of the corporation. It was done, gone. Didn't exist beyond that.
Yeah, but the tea company did exist for quite a while there, John. I mean, think about the Tea Act in 1773, and that gave that company a lot of autonomy in running its trade in the colonies, as you were talking about. And also, I think one of the biggest beefs with it was it allowed that tax exemption. I mean, way back then, we were talking about corporations, as you know, small in number as they were, already getting this tax exemption status.
Right, and again, there's an entwinement between the political, you know, powers that be and the corporate powers to be back in those days. So, you know, those things really need to be kept separate. We try to do that, or at least at some points in our history, we have tried to do that, but as time goes on, it keeps infiltrating and the blend becomes more and more again. Hence, you know, we end up in these bad spots where the banks get into all kinds of, you know, terrible financial straits by taking risks with everybody's money, and certainly none of their own, because when they screw up and everything tanks, they then come to the public and demand that we reimburse them, and none of them go to prison. And on top of that, it didn't affect their lifestyles at all.
No, it certainly didn't affect their lifestyles. But unfortunately, most of us out here, especially in the middle class and lower classes, are still feeling those effects. All right, America Now will continue after the break. All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm joined by John J. Higgins, and we are talking the power and control addiction. You know, and John, it is an addiction, isn't it? Power truly is addictive. I mean, we actually know this now scientifically, that feeling of power has been found to have a similar effect on the brain, just like cocaine. That's scary.
Yes, and I think, you know, history is filled with, you know, these people who have become actual power addicts. And I don't know that there's an easy solution to prevent that. To me, it's always it's the old phrase that you never want the guy to be the treasurer of the organization who volunteers for it. You want the guy who doesn't, because the guy who's really trying to volunteer for it usually has another agenda.
Yeah.
And I think that true went back to the Founding Fathers. There was, although they wanted to do public service, it was sort of like a reluctant duty. it was not designed for them to be, ego gratifiers.
Right, civic duty. We're talking about civic duty. They actually stepped up and said, all right, we're willing to do it for this long. And, you've brought this up, a couple times before when we spoke it. Washington could have been king, but he turned it down. He knew exactly what they didn't want. I mean, all the founding fathers knew what they had just fought against. And we're trying to stop from repeating in this country. And here we go. We've kind of turned it all upside down on its head.
Right, and I think there's some confusion in what this whole idea of individual freedoms are about. When the founding fathers were doing this, their economy was basically designed on farmers and small shop owners. There was no big industrial, complexes at the time. There was no real manufacturing other than, like sewing or something that they did by hand. The machine age really hadn't come into place, so they never foresaw that kind of business coming up and establishing itself. But what they could never foresee is that those businesses themselves would expand into all kinds of other areas and start consolidating all of its power, which I'm sure would have been just as frightening to them as the royalty would have been.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have been. When you start talking about when America really started coming into that in the Gilded Age.
Right. And, I think I said this in a previous time, it was last week or the week before, there was a CEO that was basically saying, that they don't like the idea of anybody, messing with what they're doing, and that, America is built on small businesses and we need to be establishing more small businesses. But at the same time, these major corporations make it impossible for a small business to get up and running.
Exactly, yeah. How can you possibly compete? Even Ace, Ace is the place. I love going to Ace because the people truly are friendly there. I'm putting my plug in for them. Should get them to advertise on my show. But,
right.
But it's true. Even they're struggling when, you compare them to the Home Depots and the Lowe's and all these other big box companies out there. Oh, but hey, good old Walmart, they're really coming around. They're now going to up their minimum wage. I think they're going to, $9 initially in April, and then the lowest wage will go to $10 an hour by February of next year. Oh, my gosh, how generous is that?
Well, I think that if the government was efficient, what they should be doing is demanding that Walmart pay back all the food stamps that their employees had to go on to, which you and I basically have paid for, right? We've been subsidizing Walmart with social welfare programs when you think about it.
Yep, exactly. But the whole thing it is ludicrous because we're strengthening investments in, they're talking about they're strengthening their investments in the people to inspire them to deliver superior customer service and all of that. Companies should pay more if they want to motivate their employees. I mean, that's kind of basic business in my mind, and it should be their decisions, and we probably should keep the federal government out of this part of it. But, government-mandated wages aren't going to help, and these kinds of small increases, if allowing the corporations to do it on their own, they're not going to offer it up either. Either way, it doesn't really seem to be working.
Right, and there is always there's roles for the private sector and there's roles for the governmental sector. When the private sector is exploiting certain areas, you then need our collective citizenry in the government to basically cry foul and to punish or find some kind of means of getting equity for what has been going on by the private sector. I worked in industry for a number of years back in the 70s before I finished college, and I worked for these companies that they thought nothing about dumping stuff down the drains. They thought nothing about leaving the chemicals in the backyard. There was no consequence to them. And then over the years, those companies all either they went bankrupt or they left New Jersey and they moved down south to Arkansas. Now they're probably in Mexico or Thailand. As soon as they're being held responsible, they uproot themselves and then leave.
Yeah, really, that's not exactly a solution to the problem, any way you look at it. You know, we lose the jobs when they go overseas. On top of it, they're continuing to do their malpractice, if you will. You being the lawyer, I'm using the word incorrectly probably, but, you know, they're continuing to inflict harm on these other countries now. They continue the same practices, and it's all going to come back to us anyway. So it's almost like lose even more.
And the problem is that it means that you and I and the citizens of this country are paying for their bad acts. Look what happened with Duke, with putting all that sludge in the rivers. I mean, these are atrocities when you really think about it. If you're worried about future generations, you can't be leaving the garbage for each generation to have to mop up, and not even knowing what the damage is, particularly a lot of the chemical factories, because once those chemicals are mixed in a landfill or in the backyard or in a river someplace, you're more of the scientist than I am. You don't even know what that reaction becomes.
Oh, yeah, you don't know. And the problem is we have cumulative reactions and you have cumulative effects. And many of these effects, you know, will not happen and show up possibly even in this current generation. Could be another generation or two. This is not a good thing. And, John, you're right. We need to be thinking instead of short-term, long-term. But unfortunately, with power being an addictive substance, basically, these people who are in these situations of power truly are in short-term thinking. All they're trying to do is get their fixes.
Right. They'll worry about whatever the consequences tomorrow. They'll stop tomorrow. They'll fix the problem tomorrow. And the other thing happens is as they're moving their companies overseas and doing all of these other bad acts over there, at some point that will come back to haunt us. Because if they're tied to this country, you know that we're always the target. And they'll be blaming us at one point or another.
Yes, they will, unfortunately. All right, stay tuned. More with John Higgins here on America Now after the break. All right, everybody, welcome back. I am Barb Adams here on America Now. I'm live with you this hour, being joined by John J. Higgins, and we're talking power and addiction here in the U.S. And, you know, John, our whole society's kind of turning this way. When you think about it, look at the world of celebrity. You know, those people are, for the most part, pretty messed up. You know, they get into this heady power trip, and then all the money comes upon them. And, you know, I'm thinking about somebody like, what's his name, Bieber, that kid. Less than a month ago, he was arrested again. I mean, just totally out of control. You know, they get this power that comes to them, especially at a young age, and all this money, and they just don't know how to handle it, because they usually get into these positions because they're looking for ways to feel better about themselves. But, you know, this has been ongoing throughout history. You know, let's go back to Rome.
Well, you know, the reason I always find Rome to be interesting is that their form of government is probably the closest form of government that we have of any society that pre-existed us. And I think that there's lessons that we need to be aware of that happened with Rome. And Rome, you know, ended up in the same kind of position that we're in, where there started to be these massive differences in terms of the patrician class and the plebiscites, which were, you know, the common folk. And the patricians ended up running a lot of things. And eventually, you know, addicted to power, you get, you know, a Julius Caesar that arises, you know, from being a great general and conquering, you know, Gaul and whatever, and becomes popular. And he cuts deals with a couple of other guys like Pompey and Crassus with the money. And from there, they basically get to take over the republic. They wind up where Julius Caesar becomes a dictator. And, of course, we always end up with history always shows us that there's always some kind of crisis that people need safety for, so they give up rights or whatever, and then dictators move right in.
Yep,
Yep, and that happened more than once in Rome, if I remember right. There were a couple of situations in which started off with 3 men in power, and then, lo and behold, only one of them sitting there on the throne. And you're talking about these crises that happen. We've had more than our fair share in this country right now, John, especially since 9/11. Whether you believe it was an outside act or an inside act, it almost doesn't matter anymore, because the effects of it are the same. We ended up losing a lot of rights over this.
Well, Homeland Security has become, quite a threatening device with, the whole idea of Homeland Security when it first came into being, right after 9/11 was to make sure that the various governmental agencies were communicating with one another, so they basically combined a lot of them in their way. And then, of course, they passed laws like the Patriot Act, which, of course, allows, the government into a lot of things that would have been considered private prior to 9/11. I mean, there's always a balancing act in terms of safety and what you need in terms of prosecutions. What I've seen with the collecting of all the phone records, the storing of the phone records, and all of those types of things, in its own may not be that much of a threat. Where it becomes a threat when they're held for extended periods of time and there's no safeguard in it of who gets to look in at those phone records. All we need is a dictatorial type politician who gets in there and starts using it to exploit it on a revenge list.
Exactly. And yeah, it's really disturbing to think that, as we're talking, obviously we're being recorded. This is being listened in on, and who knows what's done with it. Our phone conversations, our emails, every time we Google something, everything is stored, as you say. But I have to laugh now. Have you heard the latest about the Republicans, resorting now to their dangerous tactics to express their dislike of the president? They're actually threatening now to shut down the Department of Homeland Security, with the funding and all that. I thought that was rather interesting that they're now calling for this, because they're calling the president a serial lawbreaker. I mean, this is nuts. Personally, I think the whole thing's just nuts. It's, again, going back to this us versus them.
Well, and the biggest part of that is that the politicians aren't held liable for what their job really is. Their job really is to make the government work, not to shut it down, not to act like 3-year-olds that you've got my toy, so I'm going to take yours. They're supposed to be adults. They're supposed to be statesmen, particularly now that they want to be career people, which I'm certainly opposed to. But, this whole idea that it's a tit for tat and all of this kind of thing going around in a circle over stuff, the country is in bad shape, and now you want to start talking about shutting down sections of the government and all kinds of other things. It's absolutely insanity.
Yeah, it is. It's just finger-pointing, as you're talking about. It's just nuts, because shutdown threats, they raise that larger question about a divided government, and that's the last thing we need at this point. These people, we elect them to work together. It doesn't matter. You're divided before, okay, you're Republican or Democrat or whatever. But when you're elected, we expect you to get in there and somehow figure out how to work together for our best interest. But that's the last thing that's happening.
Well, and if you think of it this way, if the ultimate goal is to allow the corporations and the upper classes to do whatever they want, if you make government absolutely ineffective, they hold more power than the government, and all they're doing is building upon that. And it's going to make it harder and harder to change that formula where we get rid of some of this, inequality that's been going on.
Yeah, well, we've always had, in the days of old, we had the robber barons. I think you've talked about, we've talked about that before. We had the John Jacob Astors and the Goulds and, the Morgans and Rockefellers and all those people. But today we've got the Waltons and the Sheldon Adelsons and Koch brothers and Ellison and, Bill Gates, all these people. Nothing has changed there. We've always had this top elite ruling class that seem to be the ones with their corporations dictating to the government and all the rest of us what's going to happen.
But I think back in those days, it wasn't the amount of money it takes to get elected today. It has become absolutely absurd. I mean, back in those days, there was no television or radio, so money really didn't affect an election to the degree that it does today. And I think that in some ways was like more of an equalizer. You could get a common, politician, I don't want to call it a politician, let's say a common person who, starts advocating for the common man. He could start to get votes and go against whatever the machine was or the establishment. That becomes harder and harder today.
Yeah, I think it's just about next to impossible if you really look at it that way, John, considering the cost of the last elections. And like you're talking about right now, the money that's being put into a lot of these PACs. And then there's, we've talked about it with the Koch brothers, putting in so much money, nearly, $900 million or something of their own money, just to make sure their candidates get elected or at least get in there somehow. Who can compete with that?
Well, and the insanity of it is that they're arguing that they're taxed too much.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that resonates anywhere. It's selfish, it's greedy, it's un-American as far as I'm concerned, because they're not advocating to make America better. They'll put that kind of name on a foundation, but in reality, all they want is their interests to be taken care of.
Yep, that's part of the biggest problem we've got going right now. All right, we'll continue this discussion here on America Now after these commercial breaks. All right, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for listening. John Higgins joining me this hour. We're talking about the addiction of power in this country. And, John, I'm thinking about this. And, usually those who seek the power are the ones that are typically motivated by an underlying some type of disorder or something. That they have this. And once they get this power, they have this sense of arrogance and entitlement and almost even magical thinking because, they don't see problems with what they're doing. They have a real distorted sense of reality, and unfortunately, when we're talking about solutions and how we need to approach these people and change things, we're trying to talk rational thought to people that are no longer rational.
Yes, well, they're all living in different bubbles. It's usually in your state capital, and then it's in Washington, D.C., particularly among the ones that are there constantly reelected time after time. And I think that we have to really start holding them accountable. We've got to question them. We've got to find out where they're getting their funding. We've got to figure out why they're voting the way they're voting.
Yeah, total transparency. We'd have to chip it away, though, because, boy, the people that have the control and the power aren't going to want to be very transparent at all.
Well, I think probably the best ally in getting progress in this vein is that the economy is still bad. I don't think the economy is really going to get better for the middle class. Give somebody $10 an hour as a minimum wage. In New Jersey, you really can't live on that. The cost of housing and going back and forth to work and all of that is much higher. So that's a constant pressure, which I think is going to be one of the best allies to any movement to start straightening out the system. Yeah. And when people start questioning these politicians and figuring out that they're all in the pocket of one group or another, we can separate them out from the ones who are really there for the right purposes.
Yeah, and there are those, we're not trying to say that everybody's corrupt. I mean, a lot of people go into this and really do want to do some good. We've got some good politicians out there. But I think the majority right now, and the way the whole system is set up, it's allowing this corruption to just kind of overrun and overwhelm even those who get in there and really truly want to make a difference and serve.
And I think it will make it easier for the honest person who wants to run for office. I mean, I've had people talk to me at different times, and the first words out of my mouth is, I don't want to be involved with the money. Because this whole idea that somebody gives you a political donation so you can run for office and you don't owe them something is absolutely ludicrous to me.
Yep, that's true. How can you not? I mean, even when you're just friends, let alone running for office, if somebody gives you something, especially money like that, there's usually a little bit of a hook there, if not a bigger one.
Well, unless you were absolutely a disloyal sociopath or psychopath that just, was going to use whoever gave you the money and then step upon them and move on to the next, the guy who's got more money.
Well, we've got those too.
And we do. And that's what's really frightening. Some of them are trying to run for president right now, which is really frightening.
You've got one. Okay, it's time for the Christie report. Let's go.
Lord. This man, I cringe that I'm from New Jersey. I mean, I was proud of being from New Jersey. We had a couple of wacko governors over the years, but this man is just over the top. My jaw drops. He was just in New Hampshire telling them that the governor they have she's only a governor because she's running for another office. This man isn't in the state more than 3 days a week since he got reelected. Meeting with the Prime Minister in England? What in God's name can he have to contribute to what's going on in England?
You probably don't want to know at this point. Plus, doesn't he also? You were telling me recently when you and I talked, he's had trips paid, overseas to the Middle East for he and his family.
Oh, the King of Jordan put him up for a $30,000 a night hotel or something for him and his entire family because he made friends with him because there seems to be a loophole in this executive order that was put in place before him that you can take a gift from a friend. Now, how he's friends with the King of Jordan is again, it's just ludicrous, And why a governor from any state is making deals or hanging out with the leader of a foreign government? I'm telling you, the founding fathers would go through the roof if they heard that.
Yes, they would. Well, it could be interesting to see what happens in New Jersey in the future there, John. You're going to have to keep me posted because you could be having some interesting changes in the future based on what your governor's doing and the deals he's making overseas.
Well, I'm still waiting to hear from Fishman. He's the U.S. attorney. I don't know what the holdup is on that, but we've had so many things that me as a prosecutor, I don't understand why there hasn't been more done.
Yeah, well, perhaps that attorney's being flown overseas somewhere himself. We can only hope not. But oh dear. Let's get back to these corporations, though. You've got some neat ideas about this corporate welfare and how to break them up. They need to be paying their rightful share.
Well, most states in the country, this is what it started in the Northeast, where a company would come here and they would, let them reside in a town, put a factory in or whatever, and give them, a tax abatement or not even charge them any taxes for a period of 20 or 25 years. So as soon as that bill started coming due out of the state, they move. We just had Mercedes leave New Jersey going for Atlanta because the deal is sweeter. And to me, what needs to happen is that whenever those deals are cut, that there's a quid pro quo. That means if you have that benefit for those years and then you decide to leave, you need to pay back that benefit before you get to leave, or leave and pay, whatever. You just don't get to uproot because the next suitor offers you a better deal.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. What about these industries here that are now owned by foreign ownership? So I'm thinking Rupert Murdoch comes to mind. He's a biggie since I'm working in media.
I don't understand how that's even sliding by Department of Justice or whatever. And if there isn't a law about, our media being owned by a foreign national, there should be a law. I think that is just got so much risk involved with it. It's just, we rely on the news media to give us the news, the information. They slant it in all kinds of ways. Dictatorships use it for propaganda. But if we don't have Americans with American interests giving us the news, I think we have a real problem.
Well, we do have a real problem, especially since most of the media is owned by only a few. A handful own it all now. That's not healthy. This is not what you would call watchdog.
No, not at all. And of course the problem is that if we're getting information wrong here, how can we make, we are not a dictatorship. We are expected to vote and make reasoned decisions on the information in front of us. We need the correct information.
Yep, so we do. Well, it'll be interesting to see, because now we've got Bill O'Reilly following in the footsteps of Brian Williams, so woohoo, things are getting interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And, these people are usually the first ones to be pointing fingers at one another. I mean, I don't know. Look, it like you said, it really is this addiction of power, is that, they need to be a war hero when it's popular. I guess, they would need to be the town dog catcher if that became the popular thing that would get them more viewers. But, they need to be honest. And, a lot of this opinion stuff that's going on in the news shows really has to stop.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because people these days really can't tell the difference. They want to find someone they can trust. They believe the person they're listening to is someone, at least hopefully of integrity, that's speaking somewhat truthfully to them. And now we're having one after another just boom, boom. But maybe this is what we need. Maybe this is just what we need, John.
Well, what happens in most addictions before somebody gets better is what happens is that they have to hit bottom, which means they do everything they know to do to continue doing what they're doing to use until it no longer works. And they're in enough pain that they're willing to change. And I think that's what's happening to us as a country in many ways, that, we're getting to the point that we're in enough pain. We've been told all these myths that, we're going to do trickle-down economics. The corporations are going to take care of you. The wealthy know how to create jobs. That's not true. There's probably a few instances that it does happen, but that's not the general way. They even admit that it's small business that makes it work.
Yep, all right. Well, we'll continue this discussion in the future next week here with John Higgins and myself. Practical Solutions for